She was 22 years old when her father signed her name on a debt settlement and called it the only way out. There was no ring, no proposal, no morning call with flowers and careful words. Only a ledger spread open on the mahogany desk of the study where she had once learned her letters, and 3 men gathered around it like crows over a fallen thing. Her father, a solicitor with ink-stained fingers, and Sir Edmund Vane, a man of 50 with yellowed teeth and a reputation that had emptied more than one household in Perthshire. For £1,000. That was the number. That was what Catriona Drummond was worth on paper. The sum of her father's debts, consolidated, called due, payable in full or payable in her. She had been standing in the doorway she had not been invited through. She had heard every word. Her father turned when he finally noticed her. His eyes were wet. He said her name once, Cat, the way he had called her since she was small enough to ride on his shoulders at the summer fair. And then he looked back down at the paper. Edmund Vane smiled. Catriona did not scream. She did not weep. She turned, walked upstairs to her room, stood at the window, and looked out over the grey hills of Glen Strahan. And she said one thing quietly to no one, I will not. What she did not know, what none of them in that study knew, was that 3 miles away at Dunmore Castle, a man was reading a letter from his father. A letter that mentioned, in its final paragraph, a debt settlement arranged between the Drummond estate and Sir Edmund Vane. A settlement that involved the elder daughter. Alastair McIntosh, 8th Duke of Strathmore, set the letter down very slowly. He read the final paragraph a second time. Then he rose, called for his horse, and rode toward Glen Strahan without telling a soul where he was going. He would arrive too late to stop the signing. He would not be too late for everything else. The ledger. The Drummonds had once been a name that opened doors in Edinburgh. Catriona's grandfather had built the family's respectability through careful land management and a fortunate marriage. By the time her father William inherited Glen Strahan House, they were comfortable enough to be considered gentry. Not titled, not powerful, but solid. The kind of family that was invited to the right assemblies and seated in the middle of the church, where the view was decent but not presumptuous. That solidity had been crumbling for 7 years. William Drummond was not a wicked man. He was simply a weak one, and in Catriona's experience, weakness was often crueler than wickedness, because wickedness at least had the honesty of intention. Her father made bad investments with the enthusiasm of someone who believed himself cleverer than he was. He borrowed against the estate. He extended generosity to neighbors who never repaid it. He funded a season in Edinburgh for his daughters that produced nothing, because society sensed the Drummonds' desperation the way horses sensed a coming storm, and shied accordingly. By the winter of 1841, the house was cold. Not the dramatic cold of open ruin. They still dressed for dinner, still kept a cook and 2 maids, still performed the careful theater of respectability that was all they had left. But Catriona knew. She had been keeping the household accounts since she was 19. She was the one who spoke quietly with the creditors, who stretched the coal, who told her sister Elspeth, with a smile that cost something, "We're managing perfectly well." Elspeth was 18 and still believed her. Or pretended to, which amounted to the same thing. The morning of the signing, Catriona had been in the kitchen consulting with cook about the week's menu when she heard voices from the study. She had recognized Vane's voice immediately, low, satisfied, the voice of a man who had already decided how the morning would end. She had set down the household book and walked toward the study with a calm that surprised even herself, as though her body already understood what her mind had not yet accepted. She stood in the doorway for 4 minutes before anyone noticed her. 4 minutes was enough. 3 miles away, Alastair McIntosh had been awake since 5. This was not unusual. Sleep had been unreliable since his father died 6 years ago, leaving him the title, the estate, 12,000 acres of Highland land, and a collection of outstanding disputes with neighboring families that the late Duke had managed through a combination of intimidation and strategic generosity. Alastair was better at intimidation. He was working on generosity. He was 31 years old, dark-haired, gray-eyed, built like a man who had spent his youth on a Highland estate rather than in London drawing rooms, which was exactly what he was. He had attended the obligatory years in Edinburgh, had appeared at the expected assemblies, had weathered the seasons during which mothers with daughters had regarded him with the focused attention of women calculating odds. He had remained, through all of it, resolutely unmoved. Not because he was cold. He had been told he was cold so many times that he had stopped correcting people. It was simpler to let them believe it. The truth was that Alistair McIntosh felt everything rather too much and had learned, young, to keep it very far from his face. He had known the Drummonds by name for years. Their estate bordered his on the southern edge, separated by a stretch of moorland and a small river the locals called the Blackburn. He had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with William Drummond at various assemblies over the years. Polite words, the kind that meant nothing on either side. He had seen Catriona Drummond twice. Once at the midsummer gathering at Aberfeldy, 3 years ago, where she had been standing near the punch bowl in a pale yellow dress, talking to an elderly woman with the attentive focus of someone who genuinely cared what the woman was saying. And once, a year later, at the church in the village, where she had been helping a small child who had dropped a prayer book, kneeling on the stone floor without any apparent concern for her dress. Both times he looked away quickly. He had not, entirely, forgotten either. When his factor's letter arrived that morning with its final paragraph, a matter of some local concern, Your Grace, an arrangement between the Drummond family and Sir Edmund Vane regarding the settlement of debts, the details of which suggest Miss Drummond's hand is involved. Alistair had been still for a long time. Edmund Vane. He knew Vane. Everyone in the county knew Vane, the way you knew a bad stretch of road or a treacherous crossing on the river. You knew to avoid it. You knew what it had cost other people. He thought about Catriona in a yellow dress, listening to an old woman as though what she said mattered. He thought about her kneeling on a stone church floor without caring about her dress. He called for his horse. The arrival. He arrived at Glen Strahan House at 10:30 in the morning, which was, as he had feared, too late. The solicitor's carriage was already pulling away from the gate as Alistair came up the drive. He saw it and felt something he did not take the time to name. He dismounted, left his horse at the post, and knocked with more force than was strictly courteous. The maid who answered looked alarmed. He did not blame her. "I need to speak with Mr. Drummond," he said. "And with Miss Drummond." William Drummond received him in the study with the haunted look of a man who had already done the worst thing and was now living in the minutes after. He was gray-faced, older than Alistair had remembered, his hands moving against each other on the desktop as though trying to wash something away. Vane had left 20 minutes earlier. The agreement had been signed. Alistair looked at the papers still spread across the desk. The solicitor had left copies. He read quickly, his face showing nothing, though something was moving behind his eyes that would have been identifiable, to anyone paying close attention, as anger. "Where is your daughter?" he asked. "She," William Drummond swallowed. "I don't know that she'll want." "Where is she?" "She was in the garden." This, too, was something he would remember later. That when the worst morning of her life had descended, Catriona Drummond had gone to the garden. Not to weep in her room, not to rage in the corridor. She was standing near the low stone wall at the garden's edge, looking out over the moors, her back straight, her arms at her sides, her face tilted slightly upward toward the thin winter sun as though she were trying to absorb every last particle of warmth before something took it from her. She heard his footsteps on the path and turned. She did not recognize him at first. Then she did, and something shifted in her expression. Not relief. Not hope. Something more careful than either. "Your Grace." He stopped a few feet away. This close, he could see that her eyes were dry. They were also very bright, in the particular way of someone who has made a decision and has not yet told anyone else what it is. "You know what happened this morning," he said. It was not a question. "I know what was signed," she replied. "I haven't decided yet whether it will hold." He looked at her for a moment. "It won't," he said. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The agreement. It won't hold." He paused. "I intend to settle your father's debts myself. Vane will be repaid. The arrangement will be voided." Silence. A wind moved across the moors. Somewhere near the stable, a horse shifted its weight. Catriona Drummond stared at him with an expression that was not gratitude. It was, he noted with some surprise, closer to suspicion. Why? She said. Fair question. He had not entirely prepared an answer. The true answer was long and not entirely logical, and involved a yellow dress and a church floor and a paragraph in a letter that had sent him onto his horse before he'd finished his coffee. He said the simpler version. Because Vane is a man who should not be allowed near anything he cannot purchase outright. And because what your father signed this morning was not a debt settlement. It was a transaction in person. She held his gaze. And what is your transaction, your grace? You don't do this for nothing. No, he agreed. I don't. Another silence. The wind again. Her expression had shifted into something that looked like bracing herself. Then what do you want? He told her. What he proposed was not a marriage. Not yet. What he proposed was simpler, and in some ways more alarming. A betrothal, formal and publicly acknowledged, that would void Vane's claim and give the Drummond family time. Time for the debts to be properly restructured, for the estate to be stabilized, for Catriona to have a choice that was not between two men she had not chosen. And after the time? She asked. After the time, you decide. If you wish to end the betrothal, you may. I will ensure your reputation suffers nothing. I will settle the debts regardless. She looked at him for a long moment. You would pay £4,000 for the right to be refused? I would pay £4,000 to remove Edmund Vane from the equation. What happens afterward is secondary. It was not entirely true, but it was true enough for the moment. She looked back out over the moors. He waited. He was, despite appearances, a patient man. I don't know you, she said finally. No. You don't know me. No. A pause. But I should like to. Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. Something smaller, more private, like a door opened an inch to check the weather before committing to anything. I'll need a day to consider, she said. You have it. She gave him one last look, measuring, direct, entirely unimpressed by his title, and walked back toward the house. He stood at the stone wall and watched her go. The moors were very quiet. His heart was not. The betrothal. She sent word the following morning. I accept. Conditionally. I will speak with you directly before any formal announcement is made. C.D. He found himself reading the note twice and folding it more carefully than was necessary. They met in the drawing room at Glen Strahan House, with her father present for propriety and absent in every other meaningful sense. William Drummond sat near the window with the look of a man present only in the technical definition, his eyes fixed somewhere past the glass. Catriona sat across from Alastair with a small notebook on her knee. She had written things in it. He found this unexpectedly moving. My conditions, she said without preamble. I'm listening. My sister is included in the settlement. Whatever arrangements are made for this family include Elspeth. She is not to be left in a reduced situation while I am elevated. Agreed. She looked up from the notebook briefly, as though checking whether agreement had come too quickly to be trusted. Then she looked back down. My father's debts are settled in full, but he is not humiliated in the process. No public accounting. No creditors arriving at the door. It is handled quietly. Also agreed. I keep the accounts. He paused. I beg your pardon? The household accounts. Whatever household we may eventually share. She met his eyes. I have been managing the finances of this family since I was 19. I am competent. I am, in fact, better than competent. I will not be removed from that role for reasons of custom. He looked at her for a moment. Something that might have been amusement moved across his face. Not mockery, but genuine, warm recognition, as of something encountered unexpectedly in familiar terrain. Agreed, he said again. She made a small mark in the notebook. He watched her do it and thought, with a clarity that was almost startling, that he was in considerable trouble. And the last condition, she said. Yes. She looked up and held his gaze with a steadiness that he suspected cost her more than she was showing. If at any point in this arrangement you decide you no longer wish to continue, you tell me directly. Not through a letter. Not through a solicitor. A breath. I have already watched a man arrange my future without speaking to me. I will not watch it happen again. The room was very quiet. Her father did not look up from the window. "You have my word," Alistair said. And he meant it in a way that went deeper than courtesy. He meant it the way a man means something when he has just understood, for the first time, what it must be like to be on the other side of every decision. The announcement was made the following week. The county received it with the particular quality of surprise that is half genuine and half performed. Everyone pretended to be astonished that the Duke of Strathmore had suddenly become engaged to a nearly ruined Drummond girl, and everyone had in fact been assembling theories since his horse was spotted at her gate. Vane received the news by letter. His solicitor wrote back within the day demanding compensation for the dissolved arrangement. Alistair paid it without comment and sent a second letter making clear, in the precise and measured language of a man who had inherited both a title and a talent for implicit warning, that he expected no further contact with the Drummond family in any form. Vane did not write again. Catriona heard about this second letter from her father, who heard it from the solicitor, who had apparently found it remarkable enough to mention. She waited until she was alone to feel the full effect of it, the strange, unwanted warmth of being protected by someone who had not been asked to, and who had done it as though it were simply the obvious thing. She was not accustomed to being protected. She was not certain she trusted it. They began to spend time together in the way that engaged persons did. Chaperoned walks, shared dinners, calls at Dunmore Castle that grew gradually longer as winter softened toward early spring. Elspeth came to most of them, bright and curious, attaching herself to the Duke's younger sister Morag, who was visiting for the season, with the immediate warmth of someone who had been starved of female company near her own age. Alistair watched Catriona in these settings with an attention he kept carefully calibrated to look casual. He watched her with his sister, the way she drew Morag out without seeming to try. He watched her in conversation with his factor, an older man named Brodie who was initially skeptical of her presence at the estate business discussions she had quietly begun attending, and who was, within a fortnight, consulting her about grain prices with the straightforward respect of a man who has recognized competence regardless of his intentions. He watched her with the household. He watched her with his dogs, who adored her immediately and with the poor judgment typical of dogs. He watched her at dinner one evening when she thought he was reading, and she sat near the fire with a book in her lap, and the light was doing something rather extraordinary to her hair, and she was entirely unaware of him watching, and he looked away before she could catch him. She was, he had concluded, the most quietly remarkable person he had ever met. He had not told her this. He was not certain how. The first real crack in the careful distance between them came in April. Catriona had been going through the old estate records at Dunmore. Alistair had offered access to them as part of the process of understanding the betrothal's financial arrangements, when she found something. A series of promissory notes from 1829 through 1834, signed by her father, cross-referenced against the estate ledgers. The same debts she had been managing for years, but older, deeper, and she sat very still when she understood what she was seeing. Structured deliberately to ensure they could never quite be retired. She brought the papers to Alistair that evening. He looked at them for a long time. His face was doing its careful nothing, which she had begun to understand was what it did when he was thinking hardest. "How long have you known the debts were unmanageable?" he asked. "Since I was 19. 3 years. You said nothing to anyone." "There was no one to say it to." She paused. "My father knew. It frightened him. Elspeth was too young. Our mother had been dead for 5 years." She smoothed the edge of the paper. "So I just kept managing." He looked at her then. Not the careful, calibrated look he usually kept in place, but something more direct, more unguarded. Something that she felt in an entirely different part of herself than his words had reached. "You have been carrying this," he said quietly, "entirely alone." "Yes." "For 3 years." "Yes." "And you are 22. "Yes." A beat of silence. "I'm aware that it's too young for it." Something crossed his face. She could not name it precisely. It looked, she thought, something like anger, but not at her. Like the kind of anger that has nowhere to go because the thing that caused it is already in the past. "You won't be doing it alone any longer," he said. It came out more quietly than she had expected, and more absolutely than a simple promise usually sounded. She held his gaze for a moment. I'm still not accustomed to that, she admitted. Having someone else. I know, he said. You don't have to be accustomed to it yet. She looked down at the papers. He did not look away from her. Outside, the April rain began against the windows. Neither of them moved to light more candles. The fire was enough. The softening. Spring came to the Highlands the way it always did, slowly, almost suspiciously, as though the land did not entirely trust it. The hills took back their color by degrees, green pushing up through the gray, the river running fast with snowmelt, the mornings turning from iron to silver to something that, on good days, approached gold. Catriona noticed that she had begun to think about Dunmore Castle with something that was not dread. This was new. For the first months of the betrothal she had kept her feelings about the arrangement in the same part of herself where she kept other things she could not afford to examine too closely. The fear that she had simply traded one kind of obligation for another, that the Duke's consideration was a form of purchasing something, that her own gratitude was compromising her judgment. But something had shifted, quietly, without announcement. It was not one thing. There were many small ones. It was that he always had the accounts ready when she arrived to review them, laid out in order, with a cup of tea that appeared before she asked for it and was always the right temperature, because someone had noted when she usually arrived and adjusted accordingly. She did not know whether this was his instruction or a very attentive housekeeper's initiative. She suspected it was his. It was that when Elspeth mentioned, in passing, that she had always wanted to learn to ride properly, she had only ever managed the docile hired horses from the village. There had been a horse available the following week. A quiet bay mare with excellent manners. Assigned to no one in particular. Simply there. Elspeth had named her Freckle and cried about it privately for 20 minutes. It was that when Catriona mentioned, once, that she had loved the library at the house they had before the debts. The real one, with the good collection, not the 2 shelves they had now. He said nothing. 2 weeks later there was a parcel from Edinburgh. Books. The particular authors she had mentioned. No note. Just the books. She asked him about it directly. You sent them without a note, she said. I wasn't sure how to word it, he said. It could have said, here are books. From Alistair. A very short pause. That seemed presumptuous. Sending a box of books isn't presumptuous? Signing my first name to it is. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. The back of his neck, she thought, had gone slightly less than its usual controlled color. Alistair, she said. He turned. Thank you. For the books. He held her gaze for a moment. You're welcome, Catriona. It was the first time he had used her name, her actual name, not Miss Drummond, not the careful courtesy of formal address. It landed somewhere warm and entirely unexpected. She looked back at her book. He looked back at the fire. Neither of them said anything else for some time, but the silence had changed its quality entirely. The first time she saw him laugh was at her expense, which she felt was appropriate. She had been attempting to manage his largest and most opinionated sheepdog, a creature named Rory who had apparently decided that the rules applied to everyone except him, and she had ended up, through a sequence of events involving a muddy path, an unexpected chicken, and Rory's considered opinion that she should sit down, thoroughly and unmistakably sitting in a puddle. She looked up from the puddle to find Alistair Mackintosh, 8th Duke of Strathmore, leaning against the stable wall with his arms folded and something on his face that she had not seen there before. He was laughing, not politely, not the constrained social expression she had seen him deploy at dinners. Actually laughing, quiet but genuine, the kind that reached his eyes and changed the whole architecture of his face, that made him look younger and less like a portrait of himself. The dog, she said with great dignity from the puddle, is ungovernable. Rory has opinions, he agreed, still laughing. This is funny to you. It is, rather. She looked at him. He looked at her. He stopped laughing, schooled his expression, and then entirely failed to maintain it when Rory came and sat very deliberately on her foot. I hate this dog, she said. He likes you, Alistair said. Rory only sits on people he likes. That is not a consolation. He crossed the yard and offered her his hand. She took it. He pulled her up and she found herself, briefly, much closer to him than she had been before. Close enough to see that his eyes were not simply gray but gray with a rim of darker color, like the Highland sky before rain. Close enough to notice that she had not let go of his hand. She let go. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." A pause. Again. She looked up at him. He was very close to smiling again, and she was very close to something she had not expected to be close to at all. She stepped back and addressed Rory instead. "Don't sit on me again," she told him severely. Rory wagged his tail. "He's not sorry," Alistair said. "I know. Neither are you." "No," he agreed. And this time the smile escaped completely, brief and real and startling as the first sun after a long winter, and Catriona felt it in her chest like something waking up that had been very cold for a very long time. The return of Vane. It was Elspeth who heard it first. She came home from the village in early May with a flush in her cheeks that was not quite exciting and not quite alarming. The particular color of someone who has been told something significant and has not yet decided what to do with it. "Vane is back," she said. "He was at the inn last night. He's been in the village asking questions." Catriona set down the pen she had been holding. "What kind of questions?" "About the betrothal. About you and the Duke." Elspeth paused. "About whether it's real." The sentence sat between them. Whether it's real. Catriona understood exactly what Vane would be doing. He had lost the arrangement. He had been paid off. But a man like Edmund Vane did not simply absorb a humiliation and move quietly away from it. He looked for the edge, the weakness, the place where a seemingly solid thing could be pried apart. If he could cast doubt on the betrothal's sincerity, if he could suggest to the right people that the Duke's interest was temporary, that Catriona would eventually be available again. She rose. "I need to go to Dunmore." "Now?" "It's past 4. "Now." She found Alistair in the stables. He was working with one of the horses, not supervising but actually working. Sleeves rolled past his elbows, his coat thrown over the stall door. He turned when she arrived and took one look at her face. "What's happened?" She told him about Vane. She told him quietly and concisely, the way she did everything. But she watched his face as she spoke and she watched what happened to it. It was subtle. A stillness that arrived and settled in. A particular quality of quiet that she had come to understand was not absence of feeling but the opposite of it. Feeling controlled with both hands, pressed back behind a deliberate calm that would hold until it was useful not to hold. "He's questioning the betrothal's sincerity," Alistair said when she finished. "Yes. He thinks if he waits long enough I'll withdraw. Or that I'll be shown to have engaged you for—" He stopped. "For less honorable reasons." "Yes." She held his gaze. "I need you to know that I understand this, what he's implying, and I need to know how you want to manage it." He looked at her for a long moment. She felt the weight of whatever he was thinking, though she could not yet read all of it. "The most effective answer to Vane," he said slowly, "is to move the wedding forward." She went still. "Not in haste," he added quickly. "Not in a way that looks like a reaction. But if we announce a date, a real date, a near one, his speculation becomes irrelevant. The question of whether the betrothal is genuine answers itself." "You would do that? Move it forward?" He looked at her directly. "I want to marry you, Catriona. That has not been performed for the benefit of anyone else. Moving the date forward is not a strategy for Vane. It is what I would have suggested regardless." She felt the words land. All of them. The precise, careful, entirely unguarded way he had said "I want to marry you." Not as an offer, not as a plan, but as a simple fact. She stopped. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I don't know how to be. I have been managing. For so long. I have been the one who manages. And I don't know how to be the one who is simply cared for," he said quietly. She looked at him. Her throat was doing something inconvenient. "Yes," she said. "That." He crossed the distance between them, stopped an arm's length away. He did not touch her. He simply stood close enough for the warmth of it to reach her. "You've been managing alone since you were 19, he said. "You don't have to do that anymore. You can be angry at me when I make decisions without you. You can tell me when something is wrong. You can be something other than capable and composed." A pause, and then, "I would like to know all the rest of you. not only the part that holds everything together. She had not cried since the morning of the signing. She came very close to it now. "Alistair," she said. "Yes. I think I'm going to need a moment. Take as many as you need." She turned away from him, faced the open stable door, and breathed the cold evening air until her eyes stopped stinging. He waited behind her with the particular patient stillness that she had come to think of as uniquely his, not the patience of someone enduring but of someone who genuinely understood that some things needed space. When she turned back, she had herself in hand. "I'll need a fortnight," she said, "to arrange things at home, to prepare Elspeth." "Done. And I want a small ceremony, not the county's wedding. Ours." Something moved across his face. "Done," he said again, and then quieter. "I wouldn't have wanted it any other way." The burning of the ledger. Vane came to the church. This was unexpected. Not his presence in the county, they had known he was still there, but his arrival at the church on the morning of the wedding, when the ceremony had been kept deliberately private, invitations extended only to the immediate family and two of Alistair's oldest friends. He came and stood at the back, and he waited. It was Brodie, Alistair's factor, who saw him first and came quietly to the vestibule where Alistair was waiting with his groomsmen. He said the name once. Alistair's face did its careful nothing. "Leave him," he said. "Your Grace. He came to see whether this is real." A pause. "Let him see it." Catriona came to the church in her mother's altered dress. Ivory, years old, let out at the shoulders and in at the waist, the lace repaired with such care you could not find where it had torn. Elspeth had done her hair. His sister Morag had given her a sprig of early heather from the castle garden. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and she looked, William Drummond thought, absolutely nothing like a woman who had been sold to settle debts. She looked like someone who had made a choice with her eyes open and had found, against considerable odds, that it was the right one. Alistair was waiting at the altar. The moment she reached him, he turned, and the look on his face, not contained, not calibrated, not the careful nothing. The look on his face was so entirely unguarded that she felt it like sunlight after a long winter. He looked at her the way people look at things they did not expect to be allowed to keep. "You came," he said very quietly. "I said I would." "I know." A breath. "I'm glad you did." She took his hand. The Reverend began. Vane left before the vows were finished. No one stopped him. No one needed to. He had seen what he came to see. Not a strategic engagement, not a performance, not a temporarily convenient arrangement, but two people marrying each other in a small cold Highland church with heather and honesty and no performance whatsoever. There was nothing left for him to pry apart. He was in his carriage and gone before the bells rang. It was afterward, in the castle, in the first hour of quiet after the small celebration, after Elspeth had cried happily and Morag had hugged her in the manner of someone claiming territory, after William Drummond had sat with his new son-in-law and said something private that had left both men with more composed expressions than entirely convinced anyone. It was afterward, when they were alone for the first time, in the library that she had come to think of as her favorite room, that he produced the ledger. She recognized it. She had seen the original in the solicitor's office the morning everything changed. The Drummond debt ledger for £1,000, the paper that had been signed in exchange for her. Alistair set it on the table between them. Then he took the candle from the desk. "I paid Vane," he said. "And I recovered this from the solicitor's records. The original agreement, the consolidated debt, all of it." He paused. "It is yours, not mine. Yours. You decide what happens to it." She looked at the ledger, at the paper that had assigned a sum to her life and called it a settlement. She picked it up. She held it over the candle. Caught quickly. She held it until she had to let it go, and then she set it in the hearth and they both watched it burn. The figures, the signatures, her father's handwriting, Vane's seal, all of it going to ash and smoke while the fire ate through it with complete and impartial thoroughness. "Done," she said. "Done," he agreed. She turned from the fire and found him watching her with that open, unguarded face that she was beginning to understand was his real one, the one that lived under all the careful nothing, that came out only when he had stopped remembering to manage it. "I should tell you something," he said. "Tell me." "The day I read my letter." The reason I rode to your gate without waiting. She waited. I have been paying attention to you for 3 years, he said. At the midsummer gathering. In the church that winter. Briefly, insufficiently, from too far away. A pause. I don't know precisely what I was waiting for. The right moment, perhaps. Or the courage. The letter gave me neither of those things, but it gave me necessity. And apparently necessity is what I needed. She looked at him. You could have simply called. I could have, he said. 3 years ago. Would you have? A longer pause. I think I was afraid, he said, that the reality would not match I had constructed something rather significant in my mind. From very little material. And the reality? She said. He held her gaze. Exceeds it, he said. Considerably. She crossed the space between them and kissed him. Not the careful brief thing she had been managing in the weeks of the betrothal, but fully and honestly, with both hands and all the warmth she had been keeping back for reasons that no longer existed. He made a low sound against her lips that was either surprise or relief, and probably both, and his arms came around her with the particular force of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for a very long time. When they separated, they were both breathing rather differently than before. You, she said, should have called 3 years ago. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just don't be late again. Never, he said, and kissed her again. The vulnerability. They talked all night. Not with design. The evening wound itself out naturally, the fire burning lower, the candles replaced once and then left to manage on their own. The castle quiet around them as the household settled into sleep. They sat close on the library sofa, her head eventually finding his shoulder with the easy rightness of something that had always belonged there, and they talked. About his father. About the years after the Duke died, the weight of the title at 25, the sense of inheriting a shape that was too large and having to grow into it alone. About his mother, who had died when he was 12 and whom he had never entirely recovered from losing, the one person, he said, who made this house feel like something other than a very large responsibility. About Morag, his sister, who had dragged him back into the world periodically with the determination of someone who knew exactly what she was dealing with. About loneliness. He said the word once, plainly, without dressing it. I thought the coldness was the trade, he said. You keep everything manageable. Nothing can hurt you. You don't lose things because you don't let things in. That's not a life, she said quietly. That's armor. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I was very attached to the armor. I know. She turned to look at him. I could tell. The first day in the garden, when you told me about settling the debts, the way you said it. Like you were afraid I might thank you too warmly, and you would have to do something about it. Something surprised crossed his face. Was it that visible? Only to someone who understands the strategy. She met his eyes. I had my own version. Mine was called being very competent. Very managed. If you are visibly capable, no one pities you. No one looks too closely. It is excellent armor. What happened to it? He asked. You, she said. Rather inconveniently. He laughed. That real laugh, the one that changed his face. She had started to love that laugh in a way that was probably alarming. I am sorry, he said. For any inconvenience. You're not. No, he agreed, smiling. I'm not. She settled back against his shoulder. Alistair. Yes. I need you to know something. Tell me. When you said the first day that you would settle the debts regardless. That the betrothal could be voided and the settlement would stand. She paused. I believed you. That was the moment I decided. He was still. Not before. I wanted to believe you from the garden. But I had been managing for a long time. I had learned to be careful with wanting things. She turned her head enough to see his profile. When you said that you would protect us even if I refused you, I understood that you were not purchasing anything. That it wasn't a transaction. It was never a transaction, he said. I know that now. A pause. The fire settled. You understand, he said carefully, that I am still learning how to do this. How to be in it with someone, rather than alongside them. I'll do it wrong sometimes. I know. So will I. I need you to tell me when I do. Not a hint. Not manage it quietly. Tell me. I will, she said. You have to do the same. I will. Then I think we'll manage. He pressed his lips to the top of her head. More than manage, he said. She closed her eyes. Outside the Highland night was very dark and very quiet, and the fire was enough, and for the first time in 3 years, perhaps longer, Catriona Drummond, now Catriona McIntosh, was not managing anything at all. She was simply there. It was, she thought, the greatest luxury she had ever known. Vindication. The summer assembly in Aberfeldy was the first they attended as husband and wife. Catriona had not particularly wanted to go. The assemblies were the social theater of the county, useful for some people, endured by others, and she had too recent a memory of being one of the Drummond girls at the edge of the room, the ones to feel sorry for, the ones society had collectively decided were too tainted by misfortune to take seriously. You don't have to go, Alistair said. I know, she replied. That's precisely why I'm going. They arrived late, which was his preference and suited her newly. There was a particular quality of attention that accompanied their entrance. She felt it move through the room like a current, turning heads, stilling conversations. She was accustomed to being looked at as an object of pity. This was something different. She stood beside him and let herself feel it. Let herself take up the full amount of space she occupied, neither diminishing herself nor performing anything. The first person to approach was Mrs. Haldane, who had been prominent in county society for 30 years, and whose good opinion was considered by many to be a kind of unofficial credential. She was a formidable woman with shrewd eyes and a reputation for saying exactly what she thought, which in a society of careful performance was either terrifying or refreshing depending on your circumstances. She looked at Catriona for a long moment. Well, she said, the Duke did better than expected. Before Catriona could speak, Alistair said, with great pleasantness, I entirely agree. Mrs. Haldane looked at him, then at Catriona. Something shifted in her expression, the particular recalibration of a very astute person who has gathered new information. I hear the Drummond estate has been properly settled, she said. It has, Catriona said. We manage it together. Together. Mrs. Haldane appeared to consider this unusual. Yes, Catriona agreed pleasantly. We find it effective. The older woman looked at her for one more moment, then, unexpectedly, smiled. Good, she said. Good for you, girl. And she moved on. Vane was not at the assembly. He had left the county entirely, it transpired. There were rumors of debts of his own, of a creditor in Glasgow who had grown impatient, of a property sold at a loss. The universe, Catriona thought, had its own accounting. Elspeth danced 4 times and came to find her sister in between with the bright-eyed frequency of a person who needed to share her happiness with someone who would properly appreciate it. Her father sat in the corner with a glass of wine and looked, for the first time in years, like a man who was no longer waiting for the next disaster. Alistair appeared at her side near the end of the evening and stood with her quietly, watching the room. Well, he said. Well, she replied. Was it worth coming? She looked around the room, at Elspeth laughing, at her father's relaxed shoulders, at the faces that had looked at her with pity 3 years ago and were now doing something entirely different. Yes, she said. It was worth coming. He offered his arm. Dance with me. You dance. I do, occasionally and under duress. I've never seen you dance. You're about to. A pause. I should tell you, in the interest of honesty, that I am adequate at best. She laughed, put her hand on his arm, and let him lead her onto the floor. He was, it turned out, rather better than adequate. She told him so. I practiced, he said. You practiced. For the past month. He held her gaze very serious. I didn't want to embarrass you. She felt that somewhere very warm and specific. You have never once embarrassed me, she said. I burned your father's ledger in the fireplace on our wedding night, he said. That was my idea. You held it until your fingers. Also my idea. You are very difficult to take care of. I'm aware, she said. You're managing it extremely well. He smiled. That real one, the one she had taken for herself. I have good material to work with, he said. She pulled him slightly closer and they finished the dance, and the room went on around them, and none of it mattered very much at all. 2 years later, the study at Dunmore Castle had changed. This was the first thing visitors noticed, though few were certain exactly what was different. It was the same room, the same stone walls, the same great windows looking south toward the moors, the same desk that had belonged to 3 generations of Mackintosh dukes. But there was something about it now, a quality of lived-in warmth. 2 cups on the mantelpiece where there had been one. A woman's shawl draped over the second chair. A dog, Rory, incorrigible and devoted, sleeping across the threshold as though he had been placed there by treaty. The household accounts were kept in a ledger with a blue cover. The ledger with the brown cover, the old one, the county records, the management of the entire estate, sat beside it, both in Catriona's hand. Both reviewed weekly with Alistair, who had proved, over 2 years of partnership, to be genuinely and disarmingly good at being wrong about numbers and entirely willing to say so. I told you the northern field wouldn't yield, she said one October morning. You told me repeatedly, he agreed. I should have listened the first time. You should have listened the first time. I believe that's what I said. I want it noted. It's noted, he said, loudly and repeatedly. She made a mark in the ledger. He watched her do it with the expression he wore when he thought she wasn't looking, open, warm, the face under the careful nothing, and then looked quickly at the window when she glanced up. I can see you, she said. I know. You always look away. It's a reflex. I'm working on it. She set down her pen and looked at him directly. You don't have to. He held her gaze. I know that too, he said quietly. I'm still getting accustomed. Elspeth had married in the spring, the son of a minister from Stirling, a kind, steady man who looked at her with the uncomplicated devotion she had always deserved. The wedding had been held in the village church, small and honest, and Catriona had stood beside her sister and wept without any effort to stop herself. You're crying, Elspeth whispered. I'm aware. You never cry. I've reformed, Catriona said. It's recent. Her father had been there too, healthier than he had been in years. The debt's gone, the estate stabilized, the long quiet fear of collapse finally lifted from him. He had taken to spending mornings in the garden and evenings writing a memoir that nobody had asked for but that everyone suspected would be rather good. William Drummond had come to Alistair privately, 3 months after the wedding, and said something that cost him. He said he understood what his son-in-law had done. Not only the money, not only the ledger, but the particular and irreversible way he had treated his daughter, as though her judgment were reliable, her opinions worth hearing, her capability something to build with rather than manage around. She deserved that, William said. She always deserved that. I didn't give it to her. No, Alistair agreed, because there was no point in being dishonest. But she had it in her regardless. She would have found her way to it. She needed someone who could see it. Yes. William was quiet for a moment. I'm glad it was you. It was, Alistair thought, the most adequate sentence anyone had ever said to him. The morning of their 2nd anniversary was ordinary in the best possible way. Rain against the windows, the smell of peat smoke and oats from the kitchen. Rory occupies an unacceptable portion of the hearthrug. Catriona at the desk with the blue ledger, her hair unpinned, wearing the plain gray dress she wore when she was working and no one formal was expected. Alistair set a cup of tea at her elbow. She did not look up. Thank you. You're welcome. 2 years today, she said. I know. You remembered. I always remember. He settled into the other chair. I remember all of it. Every detail of every day. She looked up then. He was looking at her the way he did when he had stopped remembering to manage it, entirely, directly, with no protection. Even the puddle? She said. Especially the puddle. She laughed, and he thought, as he thought most mornings, that the sound of it was one of the better things in his life. In a life that had become, against his better judgment and with her substantial and unapologetic involvement, a very good one. Alistair, she said. Yes. I have something to tell you. Something in her voice. He went very still. She was looking at him with bright eyes and that small private expression, the one that had started to show itself on the morning she sat with her notebook of conditions, the one that meant she was about to say something she had already decided about and was curious how he would take it. "We'll need the nursery prepared," she said. The room was very quiet. Rory lifted his head from the hearthrug and looked between them with the interested expression of a dog who senses something significant. Alistair set down his cup. "When?" he said. "Spring. Spring. The same season that had brought the heather and the assembly and the beginning of everything real." He crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt before her and took both her hands in his, and he held them with the careful force of someone who understands what he is holding. "Catriona," he said. "Yes. I need a moment." She looked down at him. Her eyes were very bright. "Take as many as you need," she said, echoing his own words back to him, from the evening in the stables when the world had changed between them. He breathed. "I love you," he said. "I should say that more. I think it daily and I don't." "You show it daily," she said. "That counts. It's not the same. You're right. Say it more." "I love you. Better." He rose and kissed her forehead, her cheek, her temple, and she held his face in her hands and let him. Outside, the Highland rain was doing what it always did, coming down with complete and impartial commitment, neither asking permission nor offering apology. The moors were the color of pewter and the hills were barely visible through the mist, and it was, objectively, not a beautiful morning. But inside the study at Dunmore Castle there were 2 cups of tea, a devoted if ungovernable dog, a blue ledger that balanced precisely, and 2 people who had found their way to each other through debt and dignity, and one extraordinary act of a man who had paid double and burned the ledger. "Love has been earned here, every hour of it." "Spring," he said again, quietly, tasting the word. "Spring," she confirmed. He was smiling. The real one, the one she had taken for herself. And she thought that it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and that she would spend the rest of her life finding reasons to put it there. "We'll need to tell Elspeth," she said. "She'll cry. She'll be overjoyed." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No," Catriona agreed. "They're not." She looked out at the rain, at the gray hills, at the landscape that had been her whole world once, the world of small mercies and managed disasters, and felt, cleanly and completely, the distance she had traveled from that morning in the garden when she had said "I will not" to a future she hadn't chosen. She had chosen this one, every part of it. "Alistair," she said. "Yes. You were not late." She looked at him. "In case you were still thinking about it. You came when you were supposed to." He was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, "So did you." The rain continued. The fire burned. The ledger was ash. And in the study at Dunmore Castle, spring was already beginning.